Now, one of the repercussions of residential schools is the endangerment of Indigenous languages, some hanging by a thread on the brink of extinction. Our Tammie Sutherland joining us live now with what some are doing to ensure history does not slip away. Tam.
Good morning, Mel. Well, more than 70 Indigenous languages are spoken right across Canada, but 75% of those are barely hanging on. They're losing first language speakers every single day. But on Six Nations, the work is well underway to try to breathe new life into those languages.
How our language describes seasons or times of day or the weather is so beautiful.
Winter months.
This is the word for summer. Genhene.
It's just a whole different way of looking at the world, actually.
These are some of the words that have almost been wiped out by colonialism, government policies, and a residential school system that forced children to assimilate and abandon their language.
It is really hard to translate some of our concepts into English. So for us, if you don't have the language, you're missing a huge part of the culture.
And that's why the Woodland Cultural Center in Brantford is making it their goal to revive endangered languages like Mohawk, Cayuga, and Onondaga by teaching those who want to learn. The center is redesigning its language programs. It starts with the youngest generation with a children's learning series with books all in the language.
The other project we're doing is protecting our stories, and this is where we're actually recording via video or audio with first language speakers. So again, trying to preserve those stories. And they're very simple things. What was life like living in the community when you were younger?
These programs will be fully up and running in late 2024 when the Mohawk Institute is set to reopen. The former residential school is being redeveloped to save evidence of this dark chapter. And Montour says they're reclaiming their power by teaching Indigenous culture in a place that was initially built to erase it.
Because the children, when they attended that institution, were not allowed to speak their language and they were actually forbidden and punished for it, I want those walls to hear that language every day. I want it to be like, yeah, you didn't take it from us. We're still working to learn, and we're still working so generations will be able to speak. And that's our goal here, is that our vision is to hope that every Haudenosaunee person, every Ongwahome person in our community will speak again.
Well, the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action include several commitments to support the revitalization of language and the preservation of that culture. However, where are we on that right now? What Montour as well as NDP MPP Saul Mamakwa have to say about government funding? That's coming up a little bit later in the show. Mel, I'll send it back to you.
All right, Tammie, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it and appreciate you. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us here on Breakfast Television. As a result of the residential school system, Indigenous languages have suffered a dramatic decline. Our Tammie Sutherland now with a push to reclaim those languages and how the government can step up its efforts. Tammie.
Yeah, good morning, Melanie. So it's government policies and those residential schools that force the Indigenous community to speak English and abandon their mother tongues. And so many generations later, that has led to many of those languages nearly being lost. And advocates say that the push to revitalize them still needs some more financial support.
Look at the funding disparity between Indigenous languages and French language in this country. If they really want to make reconciliation happen, these are actions that can be done now. And we've been saying this for decades.
That's the executive director of the Woodland Cultural Center near Six Nations in Brantford, Ontario, one of the places advocating for more funding to allow better access for those wanting to reclaim their first language. Under the Federal Indigenous Language Act, more than $330 million would be allocated to support reviving endangered language through 2024. But some officials feel the support can go even further.
It's called, some people refer it as Woodgie Cree, but it could be called Woodland Cree. And it's something that I've learned, growing up. And now it wasn't until when I attended Indian Day School I think it was kindergarten. That's when I started learning English. And so it was my first language.
NDP MPP Saul Mamakwa says funding from all levels of government should be used to make Indigenous language learning more authentic, bringing it out of the classroom and onto the land.
I learned the language when I was out on the land when I was younger. And the history, when I learned the names of the plants, the fish, the animals, the creeks, the bays, the islands. We need to have these land-based activities, land-based programs that are funded. And that's where the education is, the identity, the ways of life.
Mamakwa says funding for a land-based First Nations university or college in Ontario would be ideal, with a focus on learning from elders rather than the traditional formal education that's often prioritized by the government.
That's all part of the reconciliation work that we need to be able to do, is invest in the languages, make sure there's proper programming that are Indigenous-led, First Nation-led programming.
And more financial support would equal more teaching resources. So you would see some of the words that were scrolling there throughout that story. Those are part of a traditional Thanksgiving address that the Woodland Cultural Center had translated into 6 different languages, including Mohawk, Cayuga, Oneida, Seneca. It took them 6 months of trying to track down people who could complete that translation. So that shows you just how few of those speakers there really are here in Southern Ontario, as well in upstate New York. And because there are fewer speakers means there are fewer teachers, and that is a cycle that they are desperately trying to break. Mel, I'll send it back to you.
All right, our Tammie Sutherland reporting live in Toronto. Thank you so much for that.